Okay, so it's important for us to remember from yesterday that the Black Panther Party is started in 1966 in Oakland, California, really as a response to a feeling amongst many young African Americans that MLK's message of nonviolence simply wasn't working. So again, in their black leather jackets and their berets and their big guns that they are actually have out in public, they helped change this perception about what gun ownership was and what laws needed to be made about guns. So we're going to look at one specific incident at the California Capitol that really sort of captivated the national interest and perhaps fear around guns and really sort of sets in motion gun control laws that we now experience today.
To me, uniform represents organization. If the people in the community see that you're organized, then you're going to get a lot more respect.
Oh, we were cute. Okay. Very recognizable.
The Black Panther Party very much became a part of the look of the 60s and pop culture of the 60s.
The Panthers protest rent evictions, they demand a traffic light at a dangerous intersection, and publish a newspaper addressing community issues.
I've done nobody wrong, but I'm treated so bad.
As the Black Panther Party grows in stature, a conservative lawmaker introduces a gun control bill designed to stop the party in its tracks. On May 2nd, 1967, Bobby Seale leads 30 Black Panthers to Sacramento to take on the state legislature, while Huey stays in Oakland to manage the press.
When we got there, Ronald Reagan was on the front line talking to future leaders of America or something. And so the young kids saw us coming up to walk with all these guns and rifles, and a whole horde of them came over to us. They thought we were a gun club. So naturally, some of the news cameras followed.
The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense calls upon the American people in general and the black people in particular to take careful note of the racist California legislature.
Next, they enter the assembly where the bill is being discussed.
The state assembly was in the midst of a heated debate when the young Negroes, armed with loaded rifles, shotguns, and pistols, pushed past startled guards into the House chamber.
I look around and several legislators have ducked under their damn desks. They look up and see these black people coming here with these damn guns and rifles and
Am I under arrest? Take your hands off me if I'm not under arrest.
The police, of course, were dazed and confused, as you might say.
But I'll tell you one thing, I was scared.
As soon as the Panthers leave the state capitol building, they're swarmed by police.
cops came and methodically arrested every last one of us.
They violated the law by entering the chambers while the assembly was in session.
I went to court and I was sentenced to 6 months in jail.
They put trumped up charges of conspiracy and felonies on everyone who went in to exercise a constitutional right.
The events of this day have a polarizing effect. For Black America, the Panthers represent a new, in-your-face form of protest.
That was what we call a colossal event. Bobby Seale read that mandate that went across this country like wildfire.
No one had ever taken guns into a Capitol, and I was a junior in high school and seen that, and it kind of blew my mind.
For the white establishment, the Panthers represent pure chaos.
There is absolutely no reason why out on the street today a civilian should be carrying a loaded weapon.
In a short time, the Panther Bill, as the party calls it, is passed. It is now illegal to carry a loaded weapon in California. But the government isn't going to stop there.
All right, so we need to think about what this all means, okay? So unfortunately, we're going to skip there. So here's what we have. We saw the Black Panthers take their big guns right into the California Capitol, like right into the corridors and right into actually where the lawmakers were debating a law to take their guns away. And so their protest was, listen, the California law says that we can have guns as long as they're not concealed, and this law would basically take the guns away. So it was considered really a white establishment response to the fact that the Black Panthers understood the law and were carrying their guns around. Now, again, this kind of image really sort of captured the nation's attention, like how dare they take guns into, where the lawmakers are actually working, and a number of them actually were convicted. Again, these images are quite arresting when you see them, just as the images that we saw when there were mostly white militiamen who took guns into the Michigan Capitol a few months back to protest what Governor Whitmer was doing relative to the state of Michigan's COVID policies. So just sort of seeing guns in this particular space can really sort of wake you up. Now, this is interesting because the laws are passed both in California and in the country that start to crack down on gun ownership as a result of African Americans having guns. And you saw Ronald Reagan, who at the time was the governor of California, will certainly go on to be one of the most famous presidents of all time, basically saying, well, I don't see why anybody would want to have a gun out in the street. Now I want to fast forward from, the late 60s to the early 80s, where Ronald Reagan is now the president of the United States, a Republican president, just as he'd been a Republican governor of California. And now he's speaking to the NRA, the National Rifle Association, who's going to be the next focus that we're going to look at and see how over the course of 16 years, his tune really changes.
You pointed out that police would be so busy arresting handgun owners that they would be unable to protect the people against criminals. It's a nasty truth, but those who seek to inflict harm are not fazed by gun control laws. I happen to know this from personal experience. I've always felt a special bond with the members of your group. You live by Lincoln's words. Important principles may and must be inflexible. Your philosophy put its trust in people, so you insist on individuals be held responsible for their actions. The NRA believes that America's laws were made to be obeyed and that our constitutional liberties are just as important today as 200 years ago. And by the way, the Constitution does not say that government shall decree the right to keep and bear arms. The Constitution says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
So Reagan, really speaking now to the NRA, is reminding everyone that says, it's not that the government says that people can have it. It's that literally in the Constitution, in the Second Amendment, it says people have that right that the government can't take away. So I want to focus on the fact that the NRA is synonymous right now with the Second Amendment. As I have said before in class, I think on the last 2 days, that if we were taking, a law school class on con law up until the, late 1960s, no one would have even spent any time on the Second Amendment. The professor would have gone from the first to the fourth. Second, guns, militia, what? Third, quartering soldiers, what? Well, now, in part because the NRA helped reframe the debate and made the Second Amendment not about militias, but actually about individual gun ownership. So we go from laws being made to really sort of take guns away from people like the Black Panthers. Now that sort of in some ways gave life to groups like the NRA that said, well, we don't want guns taken away, and let's activate and really push for making sure that people understand you can't take our guns because it's a constitutionally guaranteed right. Now, the NRA itself is really interesting because for a really long time, close to 100 years, it wasn't really like a Second Amendment organization. So I want you to watch this video. We're only going to watch about 3 minutes, but it talks about the evolution of the NRA, which along with their evolution comes this evolution of the interpretation of the Second Amendment.
It began as a training club for marksmanship and became one of the most feared and effective lobbying groups in Washington. But just what is the NRA, and how did it become so powerful? For NPR, I'm Ron Elving. Welcome to my office hours. Today, the organization has more than 5 million members, and it is active at both the federal and state legislating levels. It lobbies, it raises money, it spends money on campaigns. The power of this organization is legendary, especially the report cards that it issues for legislators and their positions on gun issues. The cards have been credited with the election or the defeat of many a candidate, including many incumbents. And that is how the NRA has been able to anchor the opposition to every major piece of gun legislation for the past 40 years. But how did it get there? The NRA started as an actual rifle association, a marksmanship club, all the way back in 1871, when a couple of Northern Army veterans from the Civil War decided that Northern boys ought to learn to shoot as well as their Southern counterparts knew how to do in the Civil War itself. Many people are surprised to learn today that for generations, the NRA worked with the government to limit the traffic in guns, especially where, say, ex-convicts or mental patients were involved. Then the NRA again worked with the Congress and the White House on major pieces of gun limitation legislation in the 1930s and in the 1960s. This actually angered much of their rank and file membership, especially in the 1960s as people became concerned about rising crime rates, major flaring riots in major cities, and people were buying guns for their personal protection. In 1975, pressed by these rank and file members, the NRA created its first lobbying arm, the Institute for Legislative Action in Washington, D.C. And here's the turning point from marksmanship to hard-edged political activism. Just 2 years later, at the 1977 NRA convention in Cincinnati, Ohio, a power struggle that had been going on for years burst into public view as a rebellion broke out on the floor and changed the NRA forever. Now, that Institute for Legislative Action that I mentioned was headed by a Texas lawyer named Harlan Carter. He was an immigration hawk who had been the head of the Border Patrol in the 1950s. And when the NRA leaders tried to rein him in, he organized what was called the Cincinnati Revolt on the floor of that convention in 1977. And he won the floor fight and became the organization's de facto leader. Harlan Carter's new marching orders, which have been in effect basically ever since, were to oppose all forms of gun control in Washington and in the state capitals, and to aggressively lobby for gun owners' rights. Harlan Carter proclaimed that his group would be, quote, so strong and so dedicated that no politician in America, mindful of his political career, would want to challenge our legitimate goals, unquote.
Now, this is what you just saw, okay? So here you have an organization that was actually started by Northerners after the Civil War to make sure that people actually had marksmanship skills. And that's what it's basically going to be for 100 years. In fact, it works with the government to make sure that guns are limited. In many ways, we can see that it would have supported the government in its case versus Miller in the late 1930s. It might have supported the laws that are passed by state and federal governments in the late 1960s. But by the late 1970s, when Harlan Carter takes over, he's like, no. We got a new mission. It's a political mission. And that mission is going to be to oppose every type of gun control law at the federal level and the state level. Basically meaning if anybody tries to take our guns, we will get them defeated politically, okay? And so when we think of the NRA today, we think of its amazing ability to basically exert political influence, even when it's not really that big of an organization.
The surest way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Thank you. We will be judged not by what we say, but by what we do.
The truth is, they want to ban every gun in America. It's just not politically savvy to admit it.
Hillary Clinton could take away her right to self-defense.
Senator Rubio, can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future?
We will stand and fight against any sure-to-fail form of government gun control.
So the reason I showed you this video, despite the fact you actually had to read words on the screen, is that with 5 million members, it's not, again, that huge of an organization. You would think with, more than 50% of Americans wanting some form of gun control, that we'd see more gun control laws. But the reality is that we don't, because the NRA is so effective at using its influence and its money to support political candidates in such a way that they vote against this. So it's important to note that there was one such law that did get passed in the mid-90s against, the NRA's wishes, but it did get passed. And it was called the Federal Assault Weapons Ban. And again, this is, back in 1994 when I'm in high school. And it lasted for about 10 years, and in the end, there's some problems with it. But what I want us to understand here is that
the suggestion of
there are now calls for a new ban. So again, it went till 2004. Now people are saying we need a new such ban. Well, let's look back at the legacy of the first ban to understand if another one might work or not.
The federal assault weapons ban is a major fault line in American politics.
If I believed that law would have prevented this from happening, I would support it. But I want to explain to you why it would not.
We should be outraged by how easy it is for perpetrators of these horrific crimes to obtain powerful military-style weapons.
Their goal is to eliminate the Second Amendment and our firearms freedoms.
Anything that is of military caliber or anything that has large amounts of rounds should not be accessible.
An assault weapons ban is nothing new. Congress actually passed one in 1994 with overwhelming public support. The way it worked then, 18 specific semi-automatic rifles, certain military-type features, and magazines that held more than 10 rounds became illegal to manufacture for civilian use. Any gun or magazine that was manufactured before the law went into effect was completely legal to own or to sell. During the 10 years that the ban was in place, it didn't have a discernible effect on gun violence overall. But the ban's main target, mass shooting deaths, did drop. But public opinion has shifted since then, with the nation largely divided over implementing a federal assault weapons ban now, 15 years after the original ban lapsed. Opponents say that the definition of assault weapons is problematic.
If you look at the law and its definition, it basically bans 200 models of gun in this country, about 220 specific models of gun.
Good.
Okay? But it allows legal 2,000 other types of gun that are identical.
And focusing on specific features of semi-automatic weapons was an issue with the 1994 ban. It created loopholes that allowed manufacturers to tweak certain gun designs and keep making them, or for gun owners to add on certain devices to make their weapons perform like the ones that were banned. But proponents argue that Congress could start with a more narrow definition and tighten it up with more research. They argue that they can find a line between banning all semi-automatic rifles and allowing all of them to be sold without restrictions. In the absence of a federal assault weapons ban, a few states, including New York, California, and New Jersey, have their own state-implemented bans. As calls for more actions to prevent mass shootings grow, more and more state legislatures are facing pressure to consider the same.
Okay, so we want to...
The suggestion of a federal assault weapons ban...
We want to chart where we've been. We went from, the 1930s, where the Supreme Court said, no. You can't have a sawed-off shotgun illegally because it's all about a well-regulated militia and you're not part of a militia. And then we see the Black Panthers take up arms against what they believe are racist police, and they take them into the California state capitol to protest gun laws that are going after them. And ultimately, that only pushes legislators even more, both at the state and federal level, into creating gun laws. And then we saw Ronald Reagan as governor saying, there's no reason you should ever have to have a gun out in the street. And then we see in 1983 that he's speaking to the most powerful organization about the Second Amendment, the NRA, who would more than anything like to be able to make sure that the government cannot limit guns. Then we see how the NRA has evolved from this marksmanship organization into this political powerhouse that now can pretty much make sure that any law in any state or the federal government dies that would go after guns. Now, in 1994, there was a law that was passed. And for about 10 years, it was on the books. There were some mechanisms that made it a little less effective. And then for the past, decade and a half, we haven't had one. And now with, many public shootings and school shootings, there's been a call to get another ban. And the question is, could it be effective? Is it even possible in this day and age with the power of the NRA to actually get another law like this passed? Thank you guys so much for listening. There obviously are going to be